Welcome. The material you shared with us, it outlines the life and the legacy of Charles James Kirk, born in 1993. His tragic death in 2025 really did fundamentally alter the landscape of youth politics in America.
It absolutely did.
So our mission today is a structured, in-depth examination of this source material. We want to provide you with a comprehensive understanding of his rise, the immense influence he had inside the modern conservative movement, the organizations he built, and of course the widespread and complex political reactions that followed his assassination.
We are working with a truly comprehensive document here. It meticulously traces Kirk's trajectory, from his origins as a high school activist all the way to becoming the public face of the Man-GA movement. This material covers the rapid, almost calculated growth of his core organization, the evolution of his complex and often polarizing identity, and the intense international reaction that came after his death in September 2025. This entire examination is intended to be strictly factual, just to give you a clear picture of a highly influential figure.
Yeah, because the arc of his career is, it's fascinating and frankly, it's unprecedented. How does someone go from being a suburban high school kid organizing, what was it, a cafeteria boycott?
The cookie boycott.
A cookie boycott, to a central voice who could influence cabinet appointments? So let's trace that timeline. We'll synthesize his journey from those early days right up to the leadership role he eventually occupied, and then we'll meticulously review the extensive list of political and social stances that defined his public life.
And the information we have, it really does reveal the architecture behind one of the most effective and certainly one of the most visible youth mobilization efforts in contemporary politics.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Part one, the formation of this youth movement. Where does the story really begin?
Well, Charles Kirk was born on October 14th, 1993, and he grew up in suburban Chicago, specifically Arlington Heights and Prospect Heights, Illinois.
And his family, they were Republicans.
Moderately Republican, according to the sources, though it is noted that his father, who was an architect, was a major donor to Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. So there was a clear connection to, established traditional Republican politics there.
What's particularly insightful from the material, though, is just how early this political drive started. The sources note his political awakening began unusually young, back in middle school, after he started reading the economist Milton Friedman.
Which is, as you said earlier, not typical reading for a middle schooler. And it suggests this foundational attraction to free market principles and a kind of entrepreneurial approach to political action that he really carried through his entire career.
That entrepreneurial spirit, as you call it, and that focus on tangible grassroots action, it started really early.
It did. During high school, he volunteered for Mark Kirk's successful U.S. Senate campaign. But the story that gets cited most often, the one you mentioned, it really does feel like a preview of his confrontational style. He successfully organized a boycott of cookies in the school cafeteria to reverse a price increase.
It's a small anecdote, but it perfectly captures an early understanding of how to identify a grievance, mobilize a group, and then achieve a clear, concrete outcome.
Right. It's a powerful micro example of the organizational skill he would later scale up so dramatically.
And here's where he first intersects with the national media, which shows his grasp of leveraging attention. At just 17 years old, he wrote a widely circulated essay for Breitbart News alleging liberal bias in high school textbooks.
And that immediately catapulted him onto the national stage. It resulted in his very first media appearance on Fox Business.
That initial exposure was just critical, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It showed him very early on the immense power of traditional media, and later, of course, digital media, to amplify his message and generate political currency.
Interestingly, though, he did initially pursue a very traditional path. He applied to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, but was rejected.
That's right. He was accepted to Baylor University, but he ultimately enrolled at Harper College, which is a community college in Palatine, Illinois.
And he didn't stay enrolled for long, which, as the material points out, became a central part of his public narrative.
Exactly. He withdrew after just one semester, deciding instead to dedicate himself fully to political work.
And this self-made path, deliberately foregoing a traditional four-year university education, that became a signature element of his later public persona.
He used it almost as a weapon, didn't he?
He did. He frequently cited his lack of a degree and his community college background when he was debating highly credentialed academics. It was proof of his authentic non-elite status, Although the sources do note he did later enroll part-time at King's College in New York City in 2015, taking online classes, but he never ultimately earned a college degree.
So that brings us to the founding of Turning Point USA. This is almost a classic political organizing story. It starts in May 2012. Kirk is still a teenager, just 18, and he gives a speech at Benedictine University's Youth Government Day.
And there, he meets Bill Montgomery. He was a 72-year-old conservative businessman and a Tea Party activist.
Montgomery's first impression was key. It was everything. The sources say that while other speakers had struggled to keep the students focused, Kirk instantly commanded the attention of the entire high school audience. Montgomery, recognizing this unique ability to connect with young people, encouraged him to pursue activism full-time.
And just a month later, they co-founded Turning Point USA. The explicit intent, as laid out in the source material, it was to rival established liberal activist groups. They specifically named organizations like MoveOn.org.
So this wasn't just about educating. It was about organized, structural, political opposition from the very beginning.
And the initial capital, it arrived almost immediately. This demonstrates his natural talent for networking and fundraising.
It does. At the 2012 Republican National Convention, he met Foster Friess, who was a prominent Republican donor, and he successfully persuaded Friess to finance the organization's initial stages.
And that early success really set the blueprint for TPUSA's growth, didn't it? Rapid access to powerful donors combined with this intense focus on youth outreach.
Yes, and Kirk remained the executive director, the chief fundraiser, and critically, the very visible public face of TPUSA right up until his death.
The operational model itself was simple but, brilliantly effective for the digital age. He would visit college campuses, host these informal debates and events, all aimed at persuading conservative students to join.
And that model, it generated a constant stream of viral video clips from these appearances, often these moments of heated confrontation.
Which were highly shareable.
Highly shareable, and crucially, they served as the primary mechanism for securing a steady, massive stream of donations. This is what transformed TPUSA from a small startup into one of the country's largest and most visible political organizations.
And they also expanded into holding these huge, high-production rallies, featuring the biggest names in conservative leadership, which further established their legitimacy and visibility.
And the growth statistics really underscore the organization's scale. By 2025, TPUSA reported active chapters at over 2,000 college and high school campuses.
But once that financial and organizational engine was roaring, Kirk didn't just maintain TPUSA. He built an entire architecture of influence. The organization expanded rapidly into these key affiliates focused on different specialized sectors of political and cultural engagement.
Yes, the creation of those affiliates shows a very calculated, a systematic strategy for total political engagement. You see Turning Point Action, which is a political arm focused on directly electing conservative candidates.
Then there was Turning Point Faith.
Turning Point Faith, which specifically targeted church leaders for civic engagement. The goal was to return American society to what they called foundational Christian values. And then, showing his interest in long-term structural change, they even created the Turning Point Academy, seeking to build an America-first education alternative to traditional schooling.
Let's talk about the financials for a moment, because the sheer scale of the financial operation for a youth-focused nonprofit is, well, it's staggering.
It is. The sources confirm TPUSA reported $39.2 million in revenue in 2020 alone. And Kirk himself, he saw substantial, rapid personal financial growth that was directly tied to the success of the organization.
And his personal salary trajectory, it reflects his indispensable role and that extraordinary fundraising success.
The source material indicates that his total salary from TPUSA and related organizations, it grew from a modest $27,000 in 2016 to over $325,000 by 2021, and some tax records show it was more than $407,000 by 2022.
And that kind of financial acceleration, it naturally drew attention from critics who questioned the organization's nonprofit integrity.
It did. The sources note that this success also allowed him to acquire high-end real estate, including an $855,000 condo on the Florida Gulf Coast and a $4.75 million estate in Scottsdale, Arizona.
And the organization was the subject of serious scrutiny regarding its finances and its internal governance.
Yes. A 2020 investigation by ProPublica cited misleading financial claims, questionable audits, and allegations of self-enrichment among its leaders. For many critics, the rapid escalation of Kirk's personal wealth stood in stark contrast to the organization's public messaging about grassroots conservatism.
So, to give you, the listener, some context for how these political operations actually functioned, it's important to understand the legal structure here. TPUSA itself is generally a 501c nonprofit.
Right, which means it's focused on education and research, donations are tax deductible, but its direct political activity is limited.
And that's where the affiliate Turning Point Action, or TPA, came in?
TPA is a 501c4 entity. It's a political advocacy and lobbying group. It doesn't need to disclose its donors, and it can engage in direct political activity. TPA acquired Students for Trump in 2019, and it focused intensely on mobilizing the youth vote for the 2020 Trump re-election campaign.
That mobilization effort, however, was reported to be unsuccessful. The sources say that following the 2020 election, there was a very public blame game between PPUSA leadership and the Trump campaign team over the reported decline in youth support.
And then there's the other significant controversy, which was the organization's involvement in the events surrounding January 6th.
Kirk famously claimed on Twitter that TPA and Students for Trump were sending more than 80 buses of patriots to the Washington, D.C. protest that was widely reported at the time.
It was. However, a spokesman for the organization later corrected that number significantly, stating they ultimately sent only 7 buses, carrying about 350 students.
And the sources also revealed some highly specific funding details for that. Publix heiress Julie Fancelli donated $1.25 million specifically to fund these buses, and records showed Kirk paid $60,000 for Kimberly Guilfoyle to speak at the subsequent rally.
The legal gravity of the organization's involvement was really underscored when Kirk was subpoenaed to testify before the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack.
And what happened there?
In December 2022, Kirk pleaded the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. He refused to answer questions regarding the organization's involvement. That detail alone, pleading the Fifth, it speaks volumes about the legal risks he perceived the organization and himself to be facing.
So let's look at some of the ideological projects. We have the infamous watch lists. TPUSA published the Professor Watch List and the School Board Watch List.
And these weren't just informational lists. Critics strongly argued that these lists led to organized harassment and threatened academic freedom by targeting specific academics and board members. It created a climate of fear around certain political viewpoints in education.
Okay, so the final major organizational shift to cover is the transition to Turning Point Faith.
Right. Initially, Kirk co-founded the Falkirk Center for Faith and Liberty at Liberty University with Jerry Falwell Jr. back in 2019. But after Falwell's resignation and Liberty University's subsequent decision not to renew Kirk's contract in late 2020, Kirk launched Turning Point Faith almost immediately.
And this launch, it wasn't just an organizational change. It really solidified the ideological shift towards Christian nationalism.
It did. He co-founded the venture with a Pentecostal pastor, Rob McCoy. It was explicitly designed to encourage pastors nationwide to return American society to what he called foundational Christian values. The sources cite a substantial projected budget of $6.4 million for this program, highlighting the seriousness of this new focus on fusing political activism with a very specific religious agenda.
So let's move on to part 2, the media personality and debate style. Because Kirk's influence was fundamentally built on mastering media, not traditional political office.
That's absolutely right. From October 2020 until his death, he hosted the daily 3-hour The Charlie Kirk Show on Salem Media Group. And the sources track this podcast as one of the most popular on Apple Podcasts. The reach was just huge.
Massive reach, especially among the younger demographic he is deliberately targeting.
It was. Internal data from TPUSA indicated his podcast was downloaded between 500,000 and 750,000 times each day in 2024. I mean, that is immense capital in terms of attention and influence. It demonstrates a successful bypass of traditional gatekeepers.
And to maximize that reach, he consistently adapted to new formats. He also hosted a 3-hour streaming talk show, Turning Point Live, which was aimed specifically at Generation Z.
But maybe his most significant late-stage media adaptation was his move to TikTok.
Right, despite previous public skepticism of the platform.
Exactly. He created a TikTok account in April 2024 and gained massive, almost instant traction. Some of his campus tour videos hit as many as 50 million views, showcasing his ability to translate his confrontational strategy into viral short-form content.
And his last major media expansion was signing with the Trinity Broadcasting Network in February 2025 to host a weekday talk show, Charlie Kirk Today. He was truly a multi-platform phenomenon.
He was.
Now, it is absolutely essential to contextualize the content being broadcast across these massive platforms. The sources document a critical finding from a February 2023 Brookings Institution study.
Yes, that study. It analyzed 79 prominent political podcasters and identified Kirk's podcast as containing the second highest proportion of false, misleading, and unsubstantiated statements among all of those analyzed.
And that finding suggests a consistent pattern regarding the reliability of the information that was being disseminated on his major media platform.
It does. And that volume of misinformation, according to the sources, it leads us directly into his central strategy. This pattern aligns with other documented instances regarding content control.
The sources refer to the Twitter Files report, based on internal Twitter documents released by journalist Buri Weiss, which alleged specific moderation practices.
Specifically, the sources noted that Kirk's Twitter account was flagged under Do Not Amplify algorithms. This was a system designed to restrict the visibility of his posts, to limit their organic reach, due to concerns over the content he was sharing. It really highlights the friction between his immense digital output and the platforms that were attempting to moderate it.
So the public manifestation of this media strategy was the twice-yearly university tour, featuring his Prove Me Wrong format.
And this wasn't just a spontaneous Q&A. The sources describe it as a meticulously structured, performance-driven strategy designed for maximum amplification.
A critical piece of the source material here is the review conducted by the New York Times, which analyzed over 4 dozen of these debates.
Right, and they spoke with debate coaches and university professors about the format, concluding that Kirk utilized it strategically to achieve a very specific media and fundraising outcome.
He had the massive advantage of having refined his arguments and delivery against hundreds of opponents over the years. It gave him an almost unbeatable edge in a structured debate format like that.
It did. He would speak to large, often hyped crowds of vocal supporters before inviting opponents, who were typically less experienced, often emotionally agitated students, to debate him one-on-one.
And the structure was designed less for genuine philosophical exchange and more to provoke a predictable reaction.
That's right. He used arguments specifically formulated to be maximally provocative, which resulted in agitated and defensive responses from his less experienced opponents. The primary goal was clear: to create highly shareable, viral confrontation clips.
So it was fundamentally about delivering a consistent, hardline message while orchestrating media moments that would maximize online engagement and fuel the organization's massive donor base.
It sounds less like a debate and more like performance art optimized for the YouTube algorithm.
Well, it created a constant feedback loop. The viral clips generated revenue, which funded more campus tours, which then generated more viral clips.
Precisely. The goal wasn't academic truth. It was engineered, compelling conflict that resonated with the organization's core audience and kept the financial engine running. This mastery of engineered viral content is arguably his most enduring strategic legacy.
Okay, now we move into the complex and critical review of his political and social stances. Given the highly charged nature of this material, we want to reiterate that our goal here is strictly to detail the content of these positions as it's reported in the sources, ensuring maximum impartiality and accurate representation of the information shared with us.
And we should start with his MGA activism and his administrative role. Kirk's political journey was marked by a clear and powerful ideological shift toward a full embrace of the populist movement.
Right, because in 2016, during the Republican National Convention, he initially expressed reservations about Trump. He stated he was not the world's biggest Donald Trump fan, although he did commit to voting for him.
That skepticism dissolved very rapidly. He flipped to full support for Trump at the convention and quickly became one of his closest allies and one of the most visible voices of the MAGA movement. He was often described in the sources as nothing less than the face of the movement when addressing young voters.
His commitment was formalized in his 2020 book, The MAGA Doctrine. And that book was significant because it served as a kind of manifesto.
It did. It framed the Republican Party as having definitively shifted. It was, in his words, no longer the party of Reagan, but instead a Trump-remade populist party. This book really cemented his role as an intellectual architect of the new right.
And his influence, it arguably peaked after the 2024 election. His organization's campus tours, which were marketed as the You're Being Brainwashed tour, were specifically credited with playing a key role in the youth vote outcome for Trump.
Turning Point Action claimed those efforts generated 2 billion views on social media, positioning him as an extremely influential figure in the incoming administration.
His involvement then transitioned into real political power post-election. He was cited as an early investor in 1789 Capital, which invests specifically in MAGA-focused businesses.
And more importantly, he actively aided the president-elect in choosing leadership positions for his administration, including cabinet members. He even received a formal government appointment from Trump in March 2025, being named to the U.S. Air Force Academy Board of Visitors. He held significant sway over the political direction of the executive branch.
One of the most profound ideological shifts detailed in the source material is his embrace of Christian nationalism. This marked a complete and explicit reversal of his earlier, more secular stance.
That reversal is astonishingly explicit. You can trace a clear ideological path. In 2018, he supported the concept of separation of church and state. He publicly stated, quote, "We do have a separation of church and state, and we should support that."
But by 2022, he had reversed his position dramatically.
He declared on his podcast that the separation of church and state was entirely a fabrication and a fiction made up by secular humanists.
And this new focus, it was operationalized through the launch of Turning Point Faith with Pentecostal pastor Rob McCoy, which showed his commitment to fusing religious and political power. He publicly aligned himself with the theology known as the Seven Mountain Mandate.
For listeners who may not be familiar with this term, it is vital to understand its implications. The Seven Mountain Mandate is a philosophy asserting that evangelical Christians must achieve dominion or control over 7 key areas of societal influence.
And those are government, media, education, business, family, religion, and entertainment.
Correct. Kirk explicitly cited a Bible verse, often used by followers of this mandate, urging people to occupy until I come, meaning they must actively take control of these institutions to prepare for the second coming of Christ.
By 2024, his belief in this framework was fully explicit and public. He stated, "You cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population,"
which positioned his political movement not just as conservative, but as fundamentally dependent on a specific religious and cultural foundation for the nation's survival.
Furthermore, he publicly advocated for the inherent superiority of Western civilization, attributing this superiority explicitly to the role of Christianity. He said that not all cultures are created equal. Western civilization is the best that humanity has produced. It's an outgrowth of the Bible.
That view ties his Christian nationalist ideology directly to cultural and geopolitical arguments.
The source material also extensively documents Kirk's embrace and promotion of numerous controversial, false, and often debunked claims. This positions him centrally within the sphere of pro-Trump conspiracy theories.
And this volume of disputed claims, it really became a defining characteristic of his media output.
So let's begin with the biographical claim that shadowed his career, the West Point claim. In a 2015 speech, he claimed he was rejected from the U.S. military academy, and that, quote, "The slot he considered his went to a far less qualified candidate of a different gender and a different persuasion."
And the sources detail the shifting, conflicting explanations he gave for this claim over time, which demonstrates his willingness to adjust his narrative when under scrutiny. He told the New Yorker he was being sarcastic. He told the Chicago Tribune he was just repeating something he'd been told by others.
And then later he denied ever saying the claim at all.
Exactly. Regarding racial and election fraud claims, the sources show that he promoted the white genocide conspiracy theory. He argued that Democratic immigration policies were aimed at diminishing and decreasing white demographics in America.
And he was also considered a central figure in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. He was identified as big-name social influencer in Rudy Giuliani's communications plan, repeatedly promoting false and disproving claims of widespread voter fraud.
Another late-stage controversy centered on the highly sensitive issue of Jeffrey Epstein. Shortly before his death, Kirk suggested on his podcast that Epstein was a creation of either Mossad, Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, Saudi intelligence, or maybe he was just a hired gun.
Which generated immediate pushback, right? Including responses from Israeli government officials like former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who publicly denied any connection between Epstein and Israeli intelligence.
Yes. And finally, we have to examine his rhetoric during the COVID-19 pandemic, where he was a primary source of misinformation.
He consistently referred to the virus using racially charged language, calling it the China virus. He falsely claimed that hydroxychloroquine was 100% effective in treating the virus. He was briefly banned from Twitter for that specific false medical claim.
And beyond the medical claims, he framed public health measures through a political lens. He describes social distancing prohibitions and mask requirements in churches as a democratic plot against Christianity and religious liberty.
And we should note that his organization was forced to issue a correction after one specific error was identified. His social media team confused emergency declarations when comparing the COVID-19 response timeline to the 2009 swine flu pandemic.
Right. But despite that, he continued to promote misleading claims about the efficacy and safety of COVID-19 vaccines and labeled mandatory requirements for students to take the vaccine as medical apartheid.
Okay, so let's move on to his positions on social issues, race, and identity. Kirk's views across the spectrum were highly influential given his platform, and they routinely drew intense criticism.
They did. Regarding race and civil rights, he exhibited a strong, highly publicized reversal in his public stance on key historical figures and laws. Prior to late 2023, he had praised Martin Luther King Jr. as a hero and a civil rights icon.
But in a drastic shift in December 2023, he described King as awful, not a good person. And this reversal coincided with his condemnation of the foundational Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he called a huge mistake.
He alleged that the Civil Rights Act had created a permanent DEI-type bureaucracy and had been actively turned into an anti-white weapon.
He publicly attributed national aviation issues to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, programs, which culminated in the highly controversial statement. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified.
Furthermore, he made highly inflammatory comments about prominent black women in politics and media, claiming figures like Joy Reid, Michelle Obama, and Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, arguing they didn't possess the necessary brain processing power to be taken seriously otherwise.
He also explicitly promoted the replacement theory on his show, stating, "The Great Replacement is not a theory, it's a reality."
And he further claimed that prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people in urban America, and that the Democratic Party loves it when America becomes less white. This explicit use of replacement theory rhetoric was central to his messaging on race and immigration.
On immigration and deportation, Kirk advocated for stopping all immigration completely. He called for the use of military and law enforcement tactics, including tear gas, rubber bullets, and whips on migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border.
And he justified the potential use of lethal force by consistently calling the migrants invading and spreading false claims about their criminality. He argued they would break into your homes and rape your women. He also publicly called for the deportation of U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar and commentator Mehdi Hassan.
His views on the LGBTQ community also became markedly more extreme as his ideology shifted toward Christian nationalism. While he supported secularism in 2018, by 2022, he had fully reversed those positions.
He criticized the Supreme Court's Obergefell v. Hodges ruling on marriage equality, calling it a national takeover of our laws. He frequently used derogatory language, labeling LGBTQ activists the alphabet mafia.
And he was vehemently opposed to gender-affirming care, calling for a nationwide ban and demanding Nuremberg-style trials for doctors who perform it.
There was also one highly controversial instance. While discussing the YouTuber Mrs. Rachel's use of the biblical phrase, "love thy neighbor," Kirk referenced the adjacent passage in Leviticus 18, noting the passage about stoning. He also publicly labeled being gay an error, and likened the LGBTQ pride movement to encouraging drug addicts.
Finally, on gender roles, Kirk promoted a return to traditional structures. He notably advised young women to attend college for the specific purpose of finding husbands and to embrace their roles as mothers and homemakers.
He was also a frequent critic of birth control, once saying that its use creates very angry and bitter young ladies and young women.
Now let's turn to foreign policy and his international views. Kirk's perspective on foreign policy was consistently viewed through a nationalist America First lens.
It was, and that often resulted in highly polarized stances that challenged traditional Republican foreign policy orthodoxy.
Regarding Russia and Ukraine, he consistently advanced pro-Russian talking points that often mirrored Kremlin narratives. In the days leading up to the 2022 Russian invasion, he characterized the tensions as a mere border dispute that did not warrant U.S. concern.
He staunchly opposed U.S. aid, saying that Ukraine should cut spending on a war it could not win. He specifically called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a CIA puppet and a gangster. He also claimed falsely that Crimea has always been part of Russia, a historical inaccuracy he frequently repeated.
And in November 2024, he went so far as to offer an apology to the Russian people, stating that few Americans genuinely wanted war with them.
The relationship with Israel and Jewish people was complicated and often contradictory, according to the source material. Kirk was a staunch supporter of the state of Israel.
Right. He stated he believed in the scriptural land rights given to the country and boasted of having a bulletproof resume of support for Israeli policy.
However, this support was often conditional and intertwined with controversial claims. He publicly claimed that Jewish donors have been the #1 funding mechanism of radical, open-border, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies in the U.S. He also stated that the philosophical foundation of anti-whiteness has been largely financed by Jewish donors.
And days before his death, this tension came to a head. Leaked WhatsApp texts showed he felt that Jewish donors play into all the stereotypes and were trying to bully him by withholding funding for associating with critics of Israel.
That resulted in the high-profile cancellation of a $2 million donation from Robert Schulman over the participation of Tucker Carlson at a TPUSA event. A spokesman later stated Kirk's views on Israel were complicated and nuanced in response to the controversy.
And finally, his explicit stance on Islam.
He was highly critical of the faith. He wrote that Islam is the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. He argued that it is not Islamophobia to notice that Muslims want to import values into the West that seek to destabilize our civilization, reflecting his view that Islam posed a direct threat to the Western civilization he championed.
We now turn to the tragic conclusion of Charlie Kirk's life, which sent immediate shockwaves through the entire political landscape. We approach this section with the solemnity and respect required when discussing the loss of life and the violent circumstances of his death.
On September 10, 2025, Charlie Kirk was fatally shot while speaking on stage at a TPUSA event. The event, part of the American Comeback Tour, was held at Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah.
The sources indicate the shooting occurred at 12:23 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, which was roughly 20 minutes after the event began. He was shot in the neck in front of a substantial audience, estimated at about 3,000 people.
He was rushed immediately to Timpanogos Regional Hospital in critical condition, where he was tragically pronounced dead later that afternoon.
The search for the perpetrator was brief but intense.
Authorities arrested 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson 2 days later in Washington, Utah. He was subsequently charged with aggravated murder and several other felonies, including obstruction of justice and witness tampering. Officials reported that the accused perpetrator stated he killed Kirk because he spreads too much hate.
This tragic event drew immediate, intense global attention and widespread condemnation of political violence from leaders across the political spectrum, regardless of their past relationship with Kirk or his ideology.
Yes, condolences were offered by President Trump and all living former presidents, including Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden, underscoring the severity of the act and the loss of life.
So let's talk about the memorials and the official recognition that followed.
The scale of the public mourning and the official reaction clearly demonstrated the immense influence Kirk wielded within the conservative movement, and it cemented his status as a martyr to his cause.
On September 14th, a public vigil was held for Kirk at the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. It was attended by high-ranking administration officials and numerous Republican lawmakers, signifying the official gravity of his passing.
And the primary memorial service, held on September 21 at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, was just massive in scale. The stadium reached full capacity with a total public turnout nearing 100,000 people. Among the prominent figures in attendance were President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
During the service, his widow, Erica Kirk, gave a deeply moving address. She publicly stated that she forgave the man accused of her husband's murder, which was a statement that was widely reported and resonated across the political divide.
The official recognition of his life was swift and very high profile. Following his death, President Trump ordered the flag of the United States flown at half-staff until September 14, a significant honor reserved for figures of national importance.
And President Trump announced the next day that Kirk would be posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This was formally bestowed on October 14th, which would have been his 32nd birthday.
He also received an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree from Hillsdale College. And in a sign of his international support, particularly in Israel, a traffic circle in Netanya was renamed in his honor.
So the immediate aftermath of the assassination, it was marked by intense and immediate partisan dispute.
It was, and it was fueled by the highly charged political rhetoric that had defined Kirk's career. Republicans quickly mobilized to blame the radical left for inciting the violence, while Democrats used the event to renew calls for stricter gun control legislation.
And President Trump and congressional Republicans faced criticism for immediately blaming Democrats and liberal beliefs without evidence, leading to allegations they were exploiting the death for political gain.
But the reaction quickly escalated far beyond traditional political rhetoric. Far-right activists called for retaliation and began actively doxing people they accused of celebrating or justifying the death on social media. This quickly transitioned into a coordinated campaign designed to silence and professionally punish critics of Kirk.
This campaign took on an institutional quality, often referred to in the source material as a woke right version of cancel culture. And crucially, the sources detail that the Trump administration itself became involved in the campaign.
Yes, calling for stringent responses towards universities and instructing staff to identify and discipline service members who mocked the murder.
USA Today reported a striking and concerning detail by September 18th. Over 100 people, including teachers, doctors, and lawyers, had been censured, suspended, dismissed, or were placed under investigation for comments made regarding Kirk's death.
This extensive reaction led to widespread comparisons with historical McCarthyism and the cancellation tactics previously associated with the left. It ignited a serious national debate about political speech and consequences in the digital age.
It speaks to the velocity of political reaction and the intense polarization that defined his era. The sources describe this organized campaign as an unprecedented effort to police speech in the aftermath of a political tragedy.
What stands out when looking back at all this material is how successfully Charlie Kirk transitioned from a standard conservative entrepreneur focused on free markets to a deeply polarizing figure. He successfully fused far-right political positions, specifically the America First isolationism, the aggressive culture war stance, and the full embrace of Christian nationalism with a powerful, youth-focused media platform.
And his life, culminating in his tragic assassination, undeniably underscores the deep intersection of modern media influence, organizational power, and volatile political ideology in contemporary America.
The source material shows us a man who mastered the art of viral confrontation and organizational expansion. He created a highly effective mechanism for political mobilization that could successfully influence cabinet appointments and presidential elections, all without holding traditional office.
His legacy, cemented by his assassination and the fierce political fallout, is now intrinsically linked to broader questions about the consequences of political rhetoric, the boundaries of free speech, and the power of influence when channeled through massive digital platforms.
So we'd like to leave you with a final thought to consider. Considering the rapid organizational growth, the vast media reach, and the political power he commanded outside of holding any traditional public office, what does this in-depth look suggest about the future of political power structures in the U.S., specifically how impactful and enduring movements are built and sustained when entirely independent of established government institutions?
We hope this analysis of the source material provided valuable perspective. Thanks for listening.